So that was just, by way of warning. I want to show you this because and again, I'll set it up for you, right? It's two women meeting in a bathroom. They're at a banquet. It's the 1970s. None of you were even born in the 1970s, right? Well, maybe a few. Yeah, your mother was born in the 1970s. Great. So this is like your grandmother's time, right? So it's the 1970s. These two women are at a banquet, and it's the wife meeting the girlfriend, right? And so this he that they are referring to is the man that they have in common, right? So it's an interesting moment, and as you'll see, well, let me show it to you, and then I'll talk about it. Okay? So bear with me here because I am technologically challenged, as you know. This is the mouth of my dog. I would just like to point out the sweet lips of my dog. Okay. You guys ready? Yeah. Hold on. Gotta make it big like this. What? Okay.
What do I think? What the fuck do you think you're doing? You're gonna come in here and judge me for flirting with somebody else? You've been following my husband how many years? You don't have any fucking clue what's going on. A ring on my finger. We have a child together.
He doesn't like you. He loves me, and you know it, and I know it, and he knows it. And it might be done now, but it was beautiful, and it was real. And we loved each other. You scare him, and you manipulate him, and you use your son.
Well, he must like it on some level. He must want it because he keeps coming back for it. It's like that perfume that you love. You can't stop smelling even when there's something sour in it. You can't get enough of it. But guess what? He's never going to leave me. He's always going to want me. And I will make you so sorry, Edith. I will make you so sorry for what you've done to my family. Mark my words.
That's fucked up. I would never say anything that fucked up to anybody, but you do because you're gross inside. You're so fucked up.
Oh, I'm gross inside? Maybe you're gross inside with robbing people and all that shit that you do. Maybe we're both gross inside. That's what everybody loves about us. At least he's consistent. Sometimes in life, all you have are fucked up, poisonous choices.
Okay, so I told my colleagues that I was going to show this to you guys, and they said, why? I have an answer for this. I do. Hold on, this is just really slow. So that moment, right, when one of them says, you're not the real wife. I've got the ring on my finger. We have a child together, right? I think of this as the moment of like, no, this is real, right? This is real nature over here. This is the real stuff. And the other one goes, he doesn't even love you. And he knows it, and I know it, and you know it. You manipulate him. He doesn't even love you. So she's saying, no, this is real, right? Both of them are in this impossible, inescapable situation. And each of them is saying, I've got the way out. I've got the truth, right? Until at a certain moment, Jennifer Lawrence says, maybe we're both gross. Maybe we're both disgusting, actually, right? Maybe that's why he likes us, because we're both disgusting. So it's a different kind of way of looking at this problem of the Anthropocene as this situation with no escape, right? She says, sometimes all life gives you are fucked up, poisonous choices. Now, when that scene ends, there's the kiss, and then there's the push away, and then there's the laughter as if she's this maniacal, cynical person, right? All life gives you are fucked up, poisonous choices, so we might as well do whatever we want. Come here, let's make out. Fuck you, I'm leaving, right? But actually, right after that, she walks out, and then Amy Allen walks out and sees her crying. Right? So the cynicism is not quite, it's not quite as cynical as all that, right? Now, so the reason I'm talking about this is because I want us to keep, there's a lot of controversy around this word, Anthropocene, but I want us to see it as this state of complexity, right? The state of complexity in which there are no easy answers and there are no sort of obvious ways out of the situation. We are in a situation in which what is available to us are, quote unquote, fucked up, poisonous choices. Okay? I said I would talk a little bit about the work of Donna Haraway. I said this on our first day of class. So Donna Haraway actually, she's associated with this Anthropocene movement. With those of you who are going to take Anthropocene theory with Zach next in the third quarter, you'll see he'll be reading Haraway among other people with you, right? So she gets associated with this word Anthropocene, but she actually rejects it. She says there's something wrong with this idea that we are in this new epoch where the human is everywhere, right? Where the human is completely overtakes all of reality. Let me give you a quote. She writes, "No species, not even our own arrogant one, pretending to be good individuals in so-called modern Western scripts, right, acts alone." So notice, no species acts alone. Assemblages of organic species and of abiotic, so non-biotic, right, of abiotic actors make history. The evolutionary kind of history, right, natural history, and the other kinds too. So she thinks this word Anthropocene focuses too much on this anthropos, when in fact what we should be seeing is just, we should be seeing for the first time in history how very interconnected we are with other organic life and not only. This is Donna again. She says, describing the Anthropocene, it's more than climate change. It's also extraordinary burdens of toxic chemistry, mining, depletion of lakes and rivers under and above ground, ecosystem simplification. Remember, you've heard me talk about this before. When we were talking about disability, I talked about monocultures, right? Ecosystem simplification, vast genocides of people and other critters. So now she wants to talk about genocide in interspecies terms. Right? It's not just people who are being wiped out en masse. Vast genocides of people and other critters, et cetera, in systemically linked patterns that threaten major system collapse after major system collapse after major system collapse. Right? So she wants us to also see this, this kind of tension, right? We keep talking about system collapses when we talk about the environment. But they are coming as a result of systemically linked patterns. And I think this is really important, right? I know we know this, but it's good to be reminded, because whenever we think about environmental disaster, it's like this disaster that's like coming from, I don't know, the sky. It's like coming from somewhere else. There's a disaster that will come. The flood will come. The typhoon will come. The tsunami, the hurricane, right? The earthquake comes. That then causes the major system collapse, right? But the major system collapse is actually directly linked to systemically linked patterns. So you have like systems affecting systems, something like that. So rather than talk about Anthropocene, check this out, guys. Are you ready? Look at this. Yeah, that's for you. That's my gift to you. rather than talk about the Anthropocene, she's interested in this notion of permanent complexity. That's the sort of technical term that she will use. Okay? I will not show you any images of permanent complexity, but of course I can't resist this one. Because when else am I going to be in Russia and get to show this picture to a room full of environmental thinking people? I have nothing intelligent to say about this, I'm sorry, but it's another gift. I don't know if it's real. I have no idea. It doesn't matter if it's real, in this case. But seriously, okay, so what you see here is a mass stranding, right, of whales. Mass strandings happen often, right, and they've been happening for a long time. It's not a new phenomenon. Do you guys know, does anybody know why whales strand themselves like this? Have you guys been reading about this? Is anybody interested in this? Yes, please.
I heard that it's about the ship navigation systems, I guess, so it's like noise in the...
Yeah, damn it. I was going to tell you that. Oh, you guys are too good. This is a problem. I know, yes. Yes, right. The first major stranding like this that we have on record is from something like the 17th century, right? So long before there were ships with navigation systems and this marine noise that we're going to talk about. So the reasons that were given for why whales strand themselves have to do with being disoriented, right, getting lost, but also the reason that they do it in a group. Why isn't it just one? Why isn't it just like one foolish whale? Because they're always together, yeah, right? And they are in such sort of close social systems together, and they're in such close communication together all the time, that this is what happens, right? So whales strand themselves in groups on a regular basis. And yes, the latest information that we have is exactly about marine noise. That precisely because they use their hearing to orient themselves, when they can't use their hearing properly anymore, this sort of thing happens. So all of the mass strandings that have been recorded, I think in I don't know if this is right. I don't know for how long, so I don't want to say because I'm going to get it wrong. But in recent times, all of the mass strandings that have been recorded have happened when there is naval sonar testing nearby, right? So when Navy ships are testing their sonar systems. Okay? But I'll also remind you what I said last time. Shipping noise, right? 90% of the world's trade is carried by ship. 90% of all the stuff that we need, I don't know, how much of it do we actually need? It's unclear, it's hard to say, right? 90% of the stuff that we need is carried by ship. So Haraway says, right now, the earth is full of refugees, human and not, without refuge. Right? So with Haraway, we have this idea that there's, again, permanent complexity and nowhere to go. Where are the whales stranded are a sort of amazing symbol, right, of the refugees without refuge. This is what happens when you can't find refuge, when there is nowhere to go. You keep going looking for the place to go until you can't go anymore. Refugees without refuge. Human and not, right? So when I think about marine noise, which is what we'll be talking about and thinking about tonight, but I want to invite you to also just think about noise. at all, right? Noise in general, what it does to us, this us, right? How it affects us. One thing I'd like to remind you of, right? I'm going to put it very simply. Silence is expensive. Now, what do I mean by this? Can you think of examples of this? Silence is expensive, or quiet is expensive. Can you think of times when you've had to pay some money for quiet? Yes?
When you buy a conditioner or something like this, it's more expensive if it is silent.
Yes, it's more expensive. If you buy something, it's more expensive. Yeah. What else is more expensive if it's silent? What else?
Like when you buy a flat, if the wall is more thinner,
Yep.
it's more expensive.
Yep. If the walls are thinner, right? So you want thicker walls. Thicker walls is more expensive, right? Less noise is more expensive. What else? Yes?
Street sound advertisement, for example, so it makes money.
Sorry, again?
For example, you walk on the street and you hear like, oh, buy this, and this is very rich thing. So, and some cities in Russia have like this real huge problem that the sound of advertisement is everywhere.
That the sound of advertisement is everywhere. Yeah. So if you want to get away from this noise, where do you go? To the village, yeah. It costs to go there, right? I mean, you gotta go away on vacation, on holiday, right, to your dacha or whatever, and you gotta pay for the gas. You have to get there. You have to, have the right clothes. Yes. Wow. Yes. When you buy tickets for the private plane, absolutely, right? Yes. What else? When you take the camping trip, those things cost, right? And you're doing it to get away from other people. You're doing it to get away from noise. Noise-canceling headphones, right? The good ones are really expensive, right? The good ones cost like $500 or something. They're really expensive. And by good, I mean more silent. Right? So, silence costs. We might also think about it. This is one thing we'll talk about next week when we talk about environmental justice and poverty, right? When we talk about the global south, when we talk about disaster. When we talk about cities, people living in cities in enormous numbers, people living in slums in ever greater numbers, right? So slums are growing, right? There is noise there. There are no canceling headphones there. Now, when we consider noise from the human perspective, right? Here's something interesting I discovered. So there's this new thing they're talking about now called hidden hearing loss. Now, why is it hidden? Because the test that you take when you have your hearing tested, it's called the threshold audiogram, right? That test cannot find it. It can't pick up this hearing loss. And that's because that test measures your ability to detect tones in quiet. But noise-induced hearing loss concerns our ability to hear in noisy conditions. You understand the problem, right? So we have this new phenomenon, which is hearing loss, relatively new historically, right, in the history of this species, right? Hearing loss induced by noise, right, caused by noise, but the hearing test doesn't pick up hearing loss caused by noise, or doesn't pick up how badly you hear in noisy conditions. It picks up how badly you hear in quiet conditions. In other words, if you can't hear in quiet conditions, then you have hearing loss. That's what the test says. But there's this new kind of hearing loss, which is where you can't hear in noisy conditions, right, which is slightly different. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency reports that noise and not aging. What's aging? We know this word? getting old, right? Noise, not aging, is the leading cause of hearing loss today. And the US National Institute of Health classifies hearing loss as a communication disorder. So if we were to do a sort of logical analysis of what's happening here, right, we're basically going to get from here, right, to here. In other words, at this point, when we're talking about hearing loss, we're not just talking about an environmental problem. We are talking about a social problem, because we are talking about a crisis of communication. Okay? So noise, I just tried to put it very simply here. Noise is not just an issue of environment, quote unquote, like recycling or something, right? It's an issue of communication and social life. Okay? So much for noise for humans. You see what I'm going to do with this, right? It's pretty clear. I'm going to talk about the sort of robust social lives of whales, and I'm going to talk about our social lives, human social lives, and how noise affects all of this. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how we think about the ocean at all, and why the ocean is sort of hard to imagine, right, for environmental frameworks, for environmental thinking. I want to give you two quotes, sort of classics. One is from Rachel Carson. You guys remember Rachel Carson from the first day of class? We talked about Silent Spring, right, as one of the most important texts starting the modern environmental movement. She also, before she wrote Silent Spring, she wrote something called The Sea Around Us. So her earlier work was on marine environments. Eventually, man too found his way back to the sea. Moving in fascination over the deep sea he could not enter, he found ways to probe its depths. He let down nets to capture its life. He invented mechanical eyes and ears that could recreate for his senses a world long lost, but a world that, in the deepest part of his subconscious mind, he had never wholly forgotten. What does this say? What is she saying here? Just very simply, what is she saying? Yes?
Probably saying about evolutional origin of humans.
Yes! You guys remember the pig dog from last time? Right? The common ancestor, right, between terrestrial animals and terrestrial mammals and marine mammals, right? Yeah, right. She's saying, look, if we go back far enough, we all have the same ancestor. We and the whales actually have the same ancestor. So somewhere in there, right? If we just keep going far back enough, we are creatures of the sea. And this, she says, is why the sea fascinates us so much. Because it should just scare us, right? I mean, you can't drink that water. It's probably going to kill you because you'll drown, right? The sea should just scare us. But instead, what do we do? There was another quote that I couldn't find. I looked for it. Maybe I'll find it next time if I can, by this anthropologist named Lauren Isley, American anthropologist, who writes beautifully. And he says, you know, whenever you see human beings, this is also in the 50s, he says, when you see human beings on a beach and you see them taking off their clothes and walking into that water, right, as if there were something there for them. And he says, and sometimes you see them looking through the things on the beach like, he says, like some refugees of a war. Right? This notion that there's something, we arrive at the beach and we just naturally start looking through the stuff. The driftwood, the shells, the rocks, right? The stones, the pebbles. He says, what's going on there? What do we need from this place? We need something. Here is your boyfriend Carl Sagan again, right? We love him. The surface of the earth is the shore of the cosmic ocean. From it, we have learned most of what we know. Recently, we have waded a little out to sea, enough to dampen our toes, or at most wet our ankles. The water seems inviting. The ocean calls. Some part of our being knows this is from where we came. We long to return. Wait a minute, what is this saying? And where are the origins? Is it the ocean? Is he talking about the ocean? It's the cosmos, yes. Which is the ocean, which is the cosmos, which is the ocean, which is the cosmos. It's unclear, right? Yeah, I mean, by the time here we're talking about the cosmos. Here, it's unclear what we're talking about, right? But the idea is precisely that there is our origin in the ocean, and if you keep going back, further back, there are our cosmic origins, and that's why people have to go into space, right? This is Carl Sagan, 1980, right? So, on one hand, you remember when we were talking about terrestrial wilderness, forests, parks, all that good stuff, right? When we were talking about that, we were saying there is something original there. There's something, we go back there to find something true and original about ourselves. Now, Rachel Carson says, we go back to the sea to find something even truer, even older about ourselves. Sagan is saying, we go into space to find something even truer, even older about ourselves. But the problem with that is that we're still using that terrestrial model of a place, right? And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We're using that terrestrial model to talk about a place that isn't a place, if you see what I mean. The ocean is not really a place. It's something, all right. It's no joke. But it's not exactly a place. It's not the same thing as going to Lake Baikal. Or, I don't know, Yellowstone, right? Here is a quote from Scott Russell Sanders' A Conservationist Manifesto, and I want to show you this quote because it communicates very well what we typically think when we talk about environment, right? It should go without saying that we encounter real places, not by gazing through windshields. A windshield is the window of your car. Not by gazing through windshields or by gaping at screens, right? But by walking. Alluring places invite us to immerse ourselves, to open all our senses. By comparison, the world presented by the electronic media is disembodied, stripped down, anemic, and hasty. Do you know this word, hasty? It means fast, right? Disembodied, stripped down, anemic, it has anemia, and fast, right? The more time we spend in the virtual world, the more likely we are to forget how impoverished it is. Impoverished means poor. The actual world. The three-dimensional array of sights and textures and tastes and sounds that we find in a vibrant city or a landscape needs no hype in order to intrigue us. And then he talks about a geography of somewhere, right? That a place has to be somewhere. It can't be in your computer or on your phone. It can't be on Instagram, which is nowhere, right? A geography of somewhere worthy of a visitor's deep engagement and of a citizen's love. All of this is great. It's a critique of TVs and computers and telephones, right? Wonderful. And of social media and so on. It says, get off your phone, go out and take a walk, right? And don't stay in your car right? Actually go out there, touch stuff, smell stuff. But the problem with that, right, is that we are clearly only talking about certain places. We are definitely not talking about the ocean. So the ocean doesn't seem to be part of Sanders's actual world, right? Not to mention his emphasis on this. It's interesting to note in connection with this, since we've been talking about disability a little bit, it's interesting to note that a lot of people who have lost the ability to walk or never had it or have lost it are very interested in scuba diving. So there's all this, in the US, I don't know about here, but in the US there are these foundations set up for, especially for veterans of the military, right? So former military people who have lost the use of their legs or they're paralyzed, right? To teach them how to scuba dive. So they can go and scuba dive in the ocean. And apparently it's wildly popular, so I only put that here, right? The same thing that makes the ocean so mysterious from the walking perspective, right? Makes water recreation, the same things make water recreation, especially scuba diving, attractive to people with mobility challenges, right? Mobility impaired people. Okay, so we've got this. What I'm pointing out to you are the challenges for thinking about the ocean at all. I can come in here and be like, guys, ocean conservation, right? And you'll say, yes, right, ocean conservation, good, right? But when we're actually thinking about what we're talking about, we come across these weird things, like people don't know how to think about the ocean at all because it's not a place. People don't know how to think about the ocean at all because you can't go hiking in the ocean, right? Now, another thing that happens a great deal in the media is that marine creatures are turned into aliens. What do I mean by this? So I'm going to give you some quotes from Jamie Lorimer's Wildlife in the Anthropocene, which is a book you've seen already once. So often when we're watching these shows, right, about wild animals, he says, great attention is given to portraying their alien ecologies, unfamiliar anatomies, and inhuman behaviors. This is especially true when we're looking at any sort of nature shows about marine life. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. We are presented with an improbable feast, we, the watching audience, the television audience at home, right? With an improbable feast of expansive and unpopulated locations inhabited by exotic animals, which are forever fighting, fucking, eating, migrating, and dying for their impatient channel surfing audiences, right? So when we watch these nature films, when we watch documentaries about wild animals, it's never like, here's a wild animal for 20 minutes doing nothing. Or here is an hour of a giraffe sleeping. Who's going to watch that? Nobody, right? Instead, it's this massive drama, melodrama, right? Exotic locations, drama of life. They're so different than us. You know, look at what they're doing. Can you believe it? Look at that, right? It's this objectification. It's a kind of dramatification, right, that alienates us. So he writes, you know, the reason that those shows, BBC Earth or Discovery Channel or those things, that the reason that they are so powerful is because they speak to our need for this cult of wilderness, which we've been criticizing in here for a few weeks, right? And an apocalyptic understanding of environmental change. Now, why apocalyptic? It's this idea that if there's going, excuse me, if there's going to be environmental change, it'll have to be like disaster, right? And then we rebuild the survivors. Then the survivors go and like make little houses or have children or I don't know, whatever, whoever is left over. This apocalyptic understanding of environmental change, because this is a lot sexier than what we actually have to do. Right? So I had the pleasure of getting on the internet and going through endless websites that show, all you have to do is Google marine creatures or sea creatures, and it's just one weird photo after another. It's like one weird dude after another. So I have some of those dudes here for you. That is a goblin shark on the bottom. This is an internet favorite. This is an internet star, this guy. And this is a picture of starfish having sex. You're welcome. You guys didn't believe me about queer nature, but you know, there's a lot there. And this is something called a whale shark, which is neither a whale nor a shark. Maybe it's some kind of shark, I don't know. But anyway, it's really big and scary, but it doesn't eat meat or people. This is a beautiful translucent octopus guy. My personal favorite. I know. But don't get too happy because then there's this guy. He's got like a pencil in his nose. And then at the end, of course, we go full alien. Right? Whenever the more we find out, right, the more we do deep sea exploration, the better the technologies, the better the photography. Remember we talked about the spectacle, right? The better the equipment, right? The better the Photoshop, the better all of it is. The more we are insisting on this, it's so weird in there, guys. The sea, it's so diverse, right? And so crazy and weird, and you can't imagine. We don't even know. Very sexy, not good for environmentalism. So the argument I'm trying to make is that creating that alienation, right, making that disconnection between us as terrestrial animals, right, and then this ocean and these ocean creatures makes it easier to forget something very important, right? It makes it easier to forget that there is no part of the ocean that is not completely impacted by human activity. Right? So we, again, cult of wilderness. We say, oh, the deep sea, right? The abyss. We don't know what's down there. It's so far away from us. But in fact, everything we do right now has all of this impact on exactly that system, right? So I want to show you a quote from Stacy Alaimo, right here. She's writing about plastic, but this is just a short list of all the ways in which we are impacting the ocean all the time, every day. Right? Climate change, ocean acidification, dead zones, oil spills, as if the oil just spilled by itself, right? Industrial fishing, overfishing, trawling, long lines, shark finning, bycatch, bykill. We talked about bycatch last time, right, as the cause of the extinction of the Baiji dolphin, remember? Ghost nets, I don't even know what that is. Sounds terrible. Deep sea mining, imagine how loud that is. Habitat destruction, dumping, radioactive, plastic, and microplastic pollution. Ecosystem collapse, extinction. So that's us in the sea, right? the wilder, more alien, and more awesome the animals appear, the less we have to notice just how far human activity reaches into their environments, and in many cases, into their bodies themselves, right? The fact that at this point, everything in the ocean has been touched by human practices. At some point I was working on the sort of interesting problem that orcas are apex predators, right? An apex predator is the predator at the height of the food chain, right? So orcas are, nobody eats orcas except humans, of course, right? Yeah, but so no other animal eats orcas. So orcas are apex predators, right? Apex predators, what happens with their bodies is something called bioaccumulation of pollution, which is that every animal, right, the smallest animals, they eat some polluted stuff, right? And then the bigger animal that eats that gets all of that pollution too, right? And then the bigger animal that eats that accumulates that pollution, right? So you have this accumulation, right, of pollution. By the time you are at the apex predator stage, right, you are talking about the, I think National Geographic said that orcas were the toxic sink of the ocean. That they are just floating bodies of toxins because they eat all the other animals, which are eating all the toxins and eating each other. Right? So this then gets complicated when you're talking about mammals, which breastfeed, right, or feed with milk, right? Because the milk is poisoned, the milk itself. So when in the communities where humans eat whale, right, where humans eat orcas, they're eating all of those toxins. So, excuse me. I think the president of the Ocean Alliance at one point said something like, with that orca mom, if it were a human mom, the amount of poison, it was a very strange quote. He talked about the poison in the containers that were her breasts, right? Like there's like these boxes or something. He talked about if it were a human who had that much toxin, right, that level of toxicity in their breast milk, they would not be allowed to leave the country. It would be a hazmat, right? Hazardous materials. It would be a serious danger. So this is what, when we talk about human activity reaching into the bodies of whales, reaching into the bodies of animals. So, noise. Ambient marine noise. Do you know what I mean by ambient? It's just around. Like there's a lot of ambient noise in this room right now. If we just sat here quietly, we would at some point realize it's not quiet at all. Right? There's like this vent over here. There would be like weird police sirens going by, right? Ambient marine noise due to shipping, drilling for oil, and Navy sonar has increased by a magnitude of 2 over the last 60 years. A magnitude of 2. So it's increased by 100 times. So what this means, right, is that a blue whale that was born 60 years ago, the distance over which her voice can travel, right, and that she can hear the voices of other whales, has decreased from 1,600 kilometers at the time of her birth to 160 kilometers right now. Okay, I think that number illustrates how dramatic, right, the increase in ambient noise is. Behavioral changes in marine animals that depend on sonar for their survival. Changes in migration patterns, feeding, and mating. right? So all of these things are affected by this level of noise. But also, the behavioral changes include the vocalizations themselves, the way that these animals are vocalizing. So we found, studying right whales, I don't know what the Russian name is for right whales. There's two different species of right whale, or two different varieties, I'm not sure. And they are close to extinction. I mean, their numbers are really low. I think the North American ones are like at 600 or 500, right? So very low numbers. Because they are so dependent, right, on hearing each other, their vocalizations have risen dramatically in volume. They are literally yelling at each other, right? They're yelling to be heard over the noise. The one word that I see in the literature over and over and over is this word, stress. In other words, exactly the same thing that noise does in your life. Exactly the same reason you'd go on your camping trip, except that they can't go anywhere, right? Again, that picture of them beaching themselves was possibly an attempt to get away from the noise, right? So, when we think about what noise is, of course, for me, as a philosopher, noise is, we talk about what is noise, we talk about the actual material of noise, the sounds. But I'm also interested in the noise of ideas, right? All the noise that's in our heads, which is the other reason we take the camping trip. All the crap that's in our heads. There's a philosopher named Michel Serres, and he uses this wonderful term, language garbage. He says there's two kinds of pollution, right? Hard pollution, like chemicals. But there's also something else, soft pollution. And he talks about tsunamis of writings, signs, images, and logos, flooding rural, civic, public, and natural spaces, as well as landscapes. Right? That we are constantly surrounded by this stuff, this noise of language, this noise of ideas, right? Not just in advertising, but just in general. That our brains are stressed, our bodies are stressed by this. So I want to start introducing different ways of thinking about pollution, different ways of thinking about waste, yeah? Maybe a little bit more weirdly. This is one of my favorite books that I read recently. It's called Waste by Brian Thiel. He writes beautifully. And, hold on. So Serres distinguishes between these two, right? Thiel does the opposite. Thiel says, what we actually need to be looking at is not different kinds of pollution, but the way in which pollution is ambient. That it is precisely the sort of thing that's everywhere. Waste is everywhere. He says, waste is everything plus time. Every object plus time equals waste, right? Everything. Nothing is too good to become waste eventually. So here's a quote from his book. "It's often difficult to decipher exactly what each object used to be when it was part of something we thought we needed. The sense one gets when staring for a long time into these nests of plastic," he's talking about the nests of plastic he finds on the beach, "is that they belong to us and yet feel apart from us, because they constitute the planetary debris field." I love this. "The planetary debris field that we have scattered so thoroughly and minutely," minute is small, that it's hard to find anything particularly spectacular or notable in it. It's one of the many instances when seemingly minor trash, just a piece of plastic, nothing, not some big deal, right? Seemingly minor trash demonstrates its immense strength and durability, having reached every corner of our planet and troubled or killed so many of the things it touches. Right? So for him, plastic is a great example of this, but it's not the only one, right? But this idea that it's each piece by itself is nothing. It's not that interesting. It's pretty innocent, right? Each piece by itself. Where waste becomes this overwhelming, unthinkable thing, right, is in this planetary debris field that we have scattered so thoroughly and minutely. It's this absolute profusion and diffusion of objects. That's how he thinks about waste. What Stacy Alaimo tries to point out is how ordinary it all is. Why is this important? Well, because again, when we think about environmental crisis, we think about something very important. Right? Environmental crisis is going to be this terrible thing that comes. The big day is going to come when, I don't know, it all falls apart, finally, right? But in fact, remember those systemic patterns that Haraway talked about in the first slide I showed you, permanent complexity, right? We are talking about the most banal, ordinary stuff. Right? Just living by itself produces so much waste, right? It produces such terrible effects, just living. Right, so Lauren Berlant, you're seeing her here again. She's your favorite. Remember her from National Parks? She is someone I think with over and over. Lauren Berlant talks about crisis ordinariness. Wait a minute. If it's a crisis, it can't be ordinary. If it's ordinary, it can't be a crisis. Right? And yet that's precisely our situation, she says. We now know that it's just a matter of time before. Who was it who at the beginning of the quarter somebody said, how soon? Remember? We had the how soon moment. Right? When I said, what are the environmental questions? And someone said, how soon? How soon what? How soon anything? Because we know it's coming. It's normal. Right? Remember at one point I said a few days ago, I said to you guys in here, you know, all of us in this room will either have cancer or be very close to someone who has cancer. So it's not something that's out there anymore. It's the new normal. Now, again, she's not saying this is a good thing. The point is not like, yeah, guys, this is awesome. But when we think about this paradox of crisis ordinariness, right? That the chronic diseases are normal, right? That the earthquakes are normal. It's just a matter of how soon, right? That the next, I don't know, nuclear plant disaster is coming, right? How soon, and so on. So all I want to leave you with really are these questions. When we think about growth, right? When we think about capitalism and growth, the economics of growth, right? How can we think about growth's relationship to noise in general? Not only marine noise, but all that noise, right? Waste in general, noise in general. How are our daily, ordinary lives, our very normal, banal desires, right, connected directly to marine noise? When we think about those ships, right, the big ships with the shipping containers that bring us our toothbrushes, our socks, our most ordinary things, nothing spectacular, right? And yet what's happening is this situation of refugees, human and not, without refuge. So we've got a situation, right? We've got a situation where we have to think about the relationship between desire, right, and environment. I don't have any answers, as usual. I'm here to give you some questions, right? How are we doing so far? Are you really? What? It's really depressing, yeah. All my students in America said the same thing, so I've now come. But now it's getting super depressing, yeah. Well, that's the trade-off. Beautiful pictures of whales for depression. That's the deal we're making here. That's the deal we're making. But you guys look so good. Look at you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Questions so far?